Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to introduce myself. My name is Osia Patrick, and I'm presenting on behalf of Oluwatobi Alabi. And for logistic reasons and visa challenges, he was not able to make it. And since I was here, I communicated with him. I was like, okay, I can just present on your behalf, and I will answer questions as for the sake of the conversation here. But I also encourage that for those that are interested in what I'm about to present and want to continue the communication, I'm going to leave his email address, which you can also communicate with him going forward. I just felt I should be here. And also for the records, I should say that this is my third ISA, and this is the largest population of a panel I've ever been to in ISA. It's always been one or two. I suppose we'll probably have this experience in different presentations. Even when I presented mine some few days ago, just very pockets group of people that were there that were interested in what we have to discuss. So thank you very much for showing up. Okay, so the topic before me is to discuss critical reflection on sexuality research in Nigeria, epistemology, fieldwork, and researchers' positionality. Summarily, what the study is all, this presentation is all about is to discuss the state of research on sexuality in Nigeria, and then also to present an autoethnography of the researcher's experience when discussing the topic on sexuality. And first and foremost, I must say that Toby is a male, he's cisgender male, right? And discussing sexuality in Nigeria will probably play on that, and you understand why I'm emphasizing the fact that Toby is a cisgender male. So first is for us to contextualize what sexuality in itself is. What does it connote in itself? And I will discuss the whole idea around sexuality. We know it's influenced by a host of different factors, but in essence itself, we are looking at different biological, different mental possibility and cultural forms that have defined our notion and perception of people in a sense. So basically, that's the idea of sexuality. And itself, we look at when we look at biological factors, for instance, we are looking at the reproductive capacity, and we are looking at the needs and desires of people. We are looking at their fantasy, their erotic practices, institutions and values as it is. Not necessarily that they are linked together, but when we discuss the whole concept of the research on sexuality, these are the things in which we tend to be concerned with. So like we said, it embodies the acts, the moral belief system, or an interaction of social structures within different terrain. And the perception of what gender is, the gender role, the discourse on sexuality, and how open or closed these discourses is determined by the social structure and the norms of that particular society in itself. So basically, like I said, I think I've explained that. The essence of the work itself is to explore sexuality research itself in Nigeria. So the discourse on sexuality itself is ever-changing. The exploration of sexuality itself it has been an ever-changing subject. We have looked at different aspects of it as it stands. So research across different parts of Africa as a whole, and Nigeria in particular in the case of this research, the research or the discussion, the open discussion on sexuality seems to be a very gray area. And for historical reasons, for social, cultural, and religious reasons, Nigeria, for instance, is quote and unquote a religious society. So having a conversation with people and to discuss the issue of their sexuality, what they see as their desires, and how they express those desires, is not something in which you can discuss in the public. And then you realize that puts the researcher in a position whereby you cannot explore the discussion. You cannot explore discussion as relating to sexuality in Nigeria, right? And again, another issue as relating to that is that For instance, in northern Nigeria, where this particular research was situated, it is Muslim dominated, and there is a notion whereby if you are not the relative of a particular woman, for instance, you cannot have a conversation with her, right? You can only be relatives to have conversations with her and all that. So that's also limits the extent in which you can reach out to in a discussion like that. So like I said, so basically that's what I just raised here. That sexual research in Nigeria do not get a lot of attention, and mostly when we discuss sexuality research in Nigeria, mostly discuss around marriage, demography, prostitution, and disease. But there are other things in which we could look at, not necessarily the negative as well as the positive, especially when it comes to erotic desires and the likes. And basically that's what the work is all about. So first and foremost, the research question in which we tend to answer was to look at the various ways in which sexuality is expressed in Nigeria. Is it just necessarily within marriage and reproduction in itself? What are the ways in which sexuality is expressed? And what are the historical contexts to sexuality expression among people? What are the historical contexts? Like I just gave an example now. In northern Nigeria, there seems to be what is referred to as kule, right? A closed-end living setting, whereby the female members of different families are isolated from each other, right? And you cannot relate with them and all that. So, and then again in northern Nigeria, for instance, it is quote and unquote okay for the man to express his sexuality, to probably say for instance, he wants to demand sex and all that. A man can do that, right? He can express it, and you see it around. But the position of women in the society is very traditional. It's a conservative society. Okay, so the constitutional, and then the constitutional society, like we said, is influenced by power relations in Nigeria. So basically that's that. And so basically that's the general notion. But when it comes to the state of research itself in Nigeria and Africa as it stands, first, there's limited empirical publication exploring experience and ways of being that challenge gender and sexual norms and expectation in Nigeria. The literature on that is very low. And then we also notice that as a result of the religiosity of Nigeria as it stands, the issue, so as is noted there, even 2004 raised the fact that the desire to remain religiously modest and morally upright influenced the exploration of sexuality research in Nigeria, right? Because everybody wants to quote and unquote stay holy and to be seen as holy and pure and all that. And the discourse on sexuality in most cases is seen as being vulgar, is seen as something negative that you are not expected to talk about, right? So basically that's the situation in Nigeria. And then there is, and this is very important, the dominance of positive and essentially ideologies and methodology in the discourse of sexuality in Nigeria. It's more or less more quantitative than qualitative research that is happening when it comes to topics like this. And then the methodological approach that produce understanding on this concept of sexuality seems to dismiss complicated system of language, contextual experience, cultural institution, and behavioral practice. The argument here is to say that you cannot discuss or research on sexuality from a holistic point. It has to be a narrow individual exploration of experience when it comes to sexuality. But what we notice that in Nigeria is that, or what we notice in the literature is that there is a lot of discourse that is more positive positivities in orientation. And okay, so I'll explain that after this slide. So for the research method, what was done is that we adopted. You must have noticed from the conversation here that the argument here is that there's more quantitative literature as compared to a qualitative literature, which is the gap in the study of sexuality in Nigeria. So the typical was to adopt a qualitative design. And the rationale was to explore the gray area as relating to the literature, to explore, they need to explore and prioritize participant experience, that the experience of participants needs to be in the in the discourse when we look at sexuality in Nigeria, as well as it provides suitable tools to understand subjective views and the lived experience of individuals in this place. And then we did a systematic review of some literature. So what was done in the search was to look at sexuality as a concept, and then the second search was to look at Nigeria, right? So sexuality, sex, and sexual orientation, sexual relationship, and the likes. Okay, so what was done was that at the end of the day, from a total number of 333 publications that were catalogued and that were in the web, as well as 107 additional publications that from other sources, we narrowed down that search to 34 publications that were included in the final analysis. And this is what we have discovered, what was discovered in the literature analysis itself. Like I said, a lot of work was on quantitative discourse, while the argument is that quantitative is trying to bring out the general view, right? Talking about the trend, but not necessarily the lived experience of individual when it comes to the discourse of sexuality. And you cannot have a discourse of sexuality where you are discussing just a quantitative view and not looking at personal experience, subjective experience of the people. And then also the few studies that discussed that were qualitative, what we also noticed there is that the study itself does not validate the positives view as relating to sexuality. So on final notes, we felt that for going forward, there's a need for research. The research method itself needs to change. There has to be empirical studies that empirical studies should be for grounded in experience of participants in doing complex and abstract qualitative phenomena. And then we also believe that researchers must refrain from objectifying participants or avoiding a hierarchical representation of knowledge about their experience. I thank you. So that's the email for Toby. Okay. And yeah, so I'll be available to take questions as relating to what I've presented, but for continuous communication on this particular topic, can communicate to me. Thank you very much.